Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Welcome to the 303rd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and this is the second in our two-part series on the abduction and indoctrination of members of the Reed family in the 1950s and 60s and onwards. So hello there. And this is...
It's all right, I'll take it from there. Thank you, Ben. Before we welcome back our guest and eyewitness, Thom Reed...
I didn't even say who I was. What if people don't know who
Ben.
I am? Fine. I am Ben.
Okay. Are we having...
No, never mind. I just read the thing wrong.
Anyway, Thom Reed, we're going to welcome him back in just a moment. But before we do, I just wanted to say that it is time, of course, for our weekly contest. And last week's question was, what island is considered the most haunted in Antarctica? Now, most people probably don't think of the South Polar area as hotbed of ghostly phenomena. However...
but we did get a correct answer. And the answer is Rose Island from Mark Mancuso of Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay, and of course, the ghost reports come largely from the McMurdo Station, U.S. base on Ross Island. One particular source is supposedly the 1979 crash of an Air New Zealand jet with 257 people into Mount Erebus there, the largest mountain in Antarctica, I believe. Boy, talk about being off course.
It's really off course. How'd they end up there?
I don't know. I didn't have a chance to look up the background of the crash. I do remember when it occurred. But not a good situation. But anyway, it did, and
that's kind of weird. Well,
manifestations are supposedly blamed on that. So.
Well, anyway, so this week's question is a very local but very difficult question. On what beach near Newport, Rhode Island, was a door in the sky photographed in 2010?
Okay, no.
And if you can handle that, call us locally at 401-766-1240 or from anywhere in the U.S. at 800-449-1240. And if I don't announce a winner during the show and you still think you have a shot, drop a line to me at ben@behindtheparanormal.com. So the winner will receive a copy of Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny by my dad.
Now, part one of this show aired on CBS Radio in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, and on the Internet last evening. Some people say they don't like us to do that, but I thought it was the best way to handle this subject. There is, or shortly will be, a podcast of that show available at BehindTheParanormal.com and at CBS News Sky Radio. But for those of you just joining us, let's reintroduce Thomas Reed. Now, Tom is the son of a prominent Connecticut lawyer and politician. In the 1950s and 60s, he and his brother Matthew were just two participants in what has become known as the Reed family abduction case, which has been called one of the best such cases ever officially investigated by the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. The case also involved their mother and grandmother. Now, the website you can look at is www.tomreed.info. tomreed.info.
Tom, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Tom. Let's let me just review briefly what we talked about last night for those who did not hear it, and then correct me if I miss anything. Okay, we essentially talked about the first two abductions that occurred while the family was living in Sheffield, Massachusetts, in Western Mass, not all that far from here. And what occurred was that Tom and his brother Matthew were abducted at night by what appeared to be what we found an interesting description: glowing, ghost-like aliens. Okay, who also fit the basic ideas of the Greys or whatever you want to say that a lot of times will turn up in abduction cases. This occurred on their property. They were taken out of their rooms and brought in the first case to an area in the sort of Appalachian Trail vicinity of Sheffield, which was, of course, very rural. And then in the second case, where we stopped last night, the mother and grandmother also witnessed there was an electrical storm going on and various lights were coming through the window, and this is where we pretty much left off last evening. Also, the feelings and other phenomena that occurred around the abduction were interesting as well. Usually, abductees are not given the courtesy of an explanation. They are just taken with no explanation. Medical experiments are performed on them. They are terrified. They try to fight back but can't in many cases. But none of this seems to have occurred in the Reed case, at least so far as in our story that we've covered so far. So what we apparently have is a more benign sort of phenomenon going on here, and the word indoctrination was used. It was used in the MUFON report and in our discussion with Tom last evening. Ben and I find that very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because it implies that these people were known to whoever was doing this, that there was a certain cooperative relationship that was going on or was anticipated. And the question is, well, cooperation for what? What's happening here? Why certain generations? Does this have to do with DNA, genetics? What? Something we can't even fathom? Who knows? So let's pick it up where we left off. Tom, so was that pretty much what we said last night, eh?
Yeah, that was pretty good. If I could have said it that easily, we would have made that a lot quicker show.
No, you did a fine job, and tonight I'm sure it'll be just as interesting. Okay, I'll start off with the first question here. When did you realize this wasn't, obviously you said your mother and grandmother were starting to experience things themselves, so is this when you realized that it wasn't just you and Matthew who were going through this?
Well, actually, 1969 was, I think, when it all came together, because the four of us were together at the same time in a vehicle when it happened.
Okay.
The only thing I can tell you that's interesting about this is that we mentioned the willow tree, which is something that has been very symbolic to us. And a point of interest is that happened in '66, and it wasn't that much longer that my mother had gone out and actually, for whatever reason, bought a willow tree and planted it at the watering hole where our horses drank. And my brother and I have discussed this repeatedly, that none of us had even had any inkling that she had done any, or ever saw that herself. And she doesn't even remember seeing it herself, but it was just odd that even her has planted the willow trees where she's lived and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, the willow tree seems to have been a symbol that stuck with you, and we'll talk more about that. But so the ice was not broken, so to speak, among the family until really '69, when you could talk about all this amongst yourselves?
After '69 was when, they put the house up for sale and we relocated.
And you would have been about 10 years old?
Yeah.
Okay. And, before we get into where you relocated, actually, let me ask you, did you relocate then? Was it to Glastonbury, Connecticut?
No, it was a neighboring town outside Sheffield.
Oh, a neighboring town, okay.
Okay. Half hour away or so.
All right. And Ben's going to give you one of his questions here.
What can you tell us about the symbols that you saw on the inside or outside of the craft, if there were any symbols?
Well, there were two tables that, and when I say tables, I mean more like an operating board of some sort. There were two that looked like an L. I could see underneath them, and they were relatively low. Even at 7 years old or whatever, I could still see, just the top of it. And they did have what looked like C's with a dot or a slash in it. I remember something that looked like an F with some dots underneath it. And at the time, they did look raised, almost like Braille would be at a bank, so what have you. But that's the way it looked to me. I don't know if it was raised, but it appeared to be raised. And the symbols looked to be in a brownish or goldish tint to it. It wasn't, that chrome thing that most people will reference.
Okay. Let me just interrupt here, Ben. I'm sorry. On the second and subsequent abductions, did you, as in the first abduction, were you shown anything on a screen, the star chart or whatever you were shown the first time? Did that repeat?
The second time around, no. The second time around, once my brother was brought to me, we were separated. He actually went back down a hallway, and I was taken through an open area and into another hallway that joined that same room.
Okay. Do you recall any experiments being done in you, such as other abductees describe, or what happened to you during this second abduction?
Well, as far as that goes, in '66 and '67, we don't really remember much with respect to that. What I can tell you is that my brother did remember My brother had a club foot, and he had a brace on his leg. And he does remember them looking at his leg. He does remember that. And he also, when he panicked in the house before he was brought to meet with me, I guess, if that's the way to word it, he had grabbed a toy. And he remembers having that in the room while they were looking at his leg. But aside from that, that's all he remembers. And as far as once I was brought out to this other hallway, that is pretty much the end of my memory at that point until we were brought back and, you know, my mother looked for us on horseback and the lights went on around the place and that sort of thing.
Have you ever been hypnotized to regress you back to this case?
Yeah, actually, they've asked me that before. And one of as far as being going under hypnosis for anything that's happened to us, no. My brother and I agreed to see this doctor who was looking at and evaluating my son for some certain things, which you know about. And I had gone there, and this was long after the investigation. This was only like last year, where we were trying to see if we could recall anything particular about a particular moment. So technically, yes, I did for about 45 minutes or so, but it had nothing to do with the investigation itself.
Okay. All right. Ben, you had a...
Okay, so you mentioned your family's blood types. Have you ever noticed whether people in other abduction cases have similar blood types to you and your family?
Well, the RH negative factor seems to come up a lot, and I ask that question pretty frequently when I have a conference or what have you. It's amazing how many there are RH negative, either O or AB or A. So it's more than half usually, strangely enough.
Wow. All right, and has the medical community in the subsequent years followed up on that? I don't want to jump too far ahead here because we want to talk about your son and his remarkable abilities that have been inherited from someone, apparently. But so the RH negative thing has factored in that discussion as well?
I don't know if it really has anything. To be quite honest with you, it's just one of those things that seems to have taken shape. I would have to agree that there does seem to be a significance to it, only because everyone in our family is RH negative. Now, we're not all O negative or what have you, but with respect to my son, it's been brought up that, and this is just, I'm quoting someone else, it was said that Time Life magazine had actually done an article quite some time ago and found that the only link between those who had heightened senses with respect to ESP seemed to have the RH negative factor, and that was on Time Life.
Interesting. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1966, there was another outbreak of these experiences that started with orbs and holes in the air. That's a special interest to us because of our work with these parallel worlds that we do. Can you tell us about the experiences in your case with orbs and holes in the air as you described? I know this was back at the beginning.
Yeah, that was basically right around that first night when we were talking about that kind of alarming uneasiness, that potency in the air that you could pick up on that created that self-generated anxiety and that whole bit seemed to stem from what we saw as there were about 3 or 4 that we saw at one time around our window near our bedroom. It was kind of above the window to the right, and they looked pretty much smaller than maybe a small coffee plate or maybe 6 or 7 inches.
Okay.
It was kind of weird the way one moment you could actually see it pretty clearly, and the next minute it was very difficult to see, and then you'd see it further, maybe 3 or 4 feet off to the left, almost like it just kind of evaporated where it was, and it kind of slowly, in somewhat of a silhouette or ring-looking thing, that you could spot it again. And we thought my brother and I thought that when they were more pronounced, you almost felt more of this energy, and then when they faded out, it kind of fluctuated with that a little bit. It could have been the way we were looking at it, but it didn't look like a typical orb that you would see today, that white, fuzzy type of thing. It was more like a ring.
Yeah, with sort of a bluish rim around it, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's very familiar to me from quote-unquote ghost research. So that's what fascinates me about your experience. I mean, I'm wondering, what other parallels we're going to discover here. Okay, at any point in all of this, or in your life at all, have you had other seemingly unrelated paranormal experiences, ghosts, increased psychic abilities, cryptid sightings, things appearing and disappearing in your house, time-space slips, anything like that?
The only thing I can tell you is this. When my son was first born and we were in Fort Myers, Florida, and had actually attended the same, abduction group at the time run by Tim Wilson, who actually, Sparks actually had gone to that same meeting back then in '94. When my son was, let's say, maybe 4 to 5 weeks old, my wife and I had, laid him to bed, and he was on his back with his blue water milk bottle, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife and I both woke up after having what we thought was, at the time, the same dream. It was kind of strange. And we got up and we ran across the living room because we just had this feeling something was wrong with our son. And we went through the living room, the rocking chair was moving, and our son was face down in the crib. And ever since then, we thought, here we go, something's happening again. And we really couldn't explain it. That's the only time anything like that has really happened outside something that we pretty much think we have a handle on, if you will.
Well, face down in the crib, that could be pretty dangerous. What have you at any point felt any kind of negativity going on, any kind of hostility from anything?
No.
Okay.
No, I just, obviously, though, he wasn't strong enough to move himself over.
Yeah,
which, again, isn't something we talk about a lot, but since you had asked.
Sure. Yeah, well, no, you don't have to talk about anything you're not comfortable with, but it's just all sort of part of the story. Let's go back to '69 and the sort of, I suppose, thickening of the plot in the sense that you realized it wasn't just you and your brother. What did you and your mother and your grandmother and your brother talk about? I mean, how did you discuss it? Did you come to any conclusions about what it was all about or what the purpose was?
Well, I think the best way to answer that would be that my grandmother was extremely traumatized that fall of '69 after we were all back at the car, and everyone was very shaken up.
Oh, that's when you actually saw a craft altogether.
It looked like my grandmother referenced it as a flying strip mall that was behind the car, and she was definitely the most affected by it. And it was at that point, when I say that point, I mean within a few months, we were informed that this had happened with my mother in '54, and in that case, I just came to a decision to just sell the farm and move on.
Okay.
All right. So you mentioned your stepfather. He had no experiences whatsoever. How did he feel about you all talking about this?
Well, he came into the picture later on, and it's not as if when he was married to my mother at the time when things started happening with my son and my wife. And what I mean by that is some of the stuff we just shared with you, and the fact that he knew about it and respected it. I wouldn't say it wasn't like he didn't believe it, because we knew this was happening. I mean, he was around us the entire time back in the '60s. I mean, he was still around and involved and grew up with our family in some respect, knowing about this all along. So it wasn't like it got thrown into the lap. Although not personally experiencing it, I think he was looking at things a little bit from the outside, and probably why he was, writing a book about it later on.
Let's take this into a different area. You mentioned something about the reptilian. So where did the reptilian come from, or where did he come in, or it, and what's it all about?
Well, I'll be honest with you. That, which is probably on UFO Casebook, I didn't actually write that. At the time that was posted, it was written by someone else who thought they knew our case better than us.
I know the term.
Yeah, it's everybody's an expert.
Yeah.
It hasn't been till recently that we've started to use illustrators and be able to get out what we actually saw. And And at this point, too, I've kind of strayed from, using tabloid type of terminology, if you will. Or just all I can do is kind of sketch or draw what we saw and have someone else put it together and then let everyone else make up their mind. But this particular being that we saw was nothing like what we have seen, throughout the internet or what anyone else has showed us or discussions that have come up in conferences, if you will. It really kind of looked more like it had a head of kind of like an ant. It was goldish, and the body was more teardrop, and the legs that it had were kind of stick-like. And so I sketched it when I was about 10 or 12 years old, and had given it to an illustrator about 3 or 4 months ago, and he finally finished it. And I don't know what you'd call it, but everyone else seems to have a name for it, and that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah.
But that was seen in '69.
One of the reasons we ask questions like that, Tom, is because I'm always fascinated by the microbe phenomenon. The Europeans all arrived here, and all of a sudden the natives all started dying of diseases they had no immunity to, and to which the Europeans did. And yet the Europeans don't seem to have picked up anything from the natives. I don't know. So one would think that if these are aliens in any classic sense, travelers from another planet, which there may be serious doubt about that, is were they wearing any sort of apparatus? When you have the so-called reptilians or anything, sometimes they have apparatus such as in some ancient petroglyphs and supposed carvings of ancient civilizations where they're supposedly talking about ancient alien astronauts, things of this kind. Did you ever see any of these creatures that had any sort of mechanical devices on them?
What I'll say is this: the first encounter that we had in 66 and 67, they were all very, very similar. You would not be able to tell A from B, and the lenses that they had on their face and so on and so forth looked to me to be somewhat of a hood of some sort. So it did look to me like when they were outside, they had this very light sheen to them, maybe like a 2-watt bulb or a 1-watt bulb. When they were in the craft, they did not have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like they still had the lenses on their head, but I'm not going to say they looked like they had hoods anymore. I think those lenses are just eye covering. As far as what the other being may have been wearing, it looked just to be raw in itself. So the only time I would say that they look to be something covering them as a whole, would be when the little short-looking figures were outside.
Did you have any physical reactions to any of these encounters? In other words, did you have allergies, rashes, scoops in the skin? You know what I'm getting at. Any sorts of diseases you couldn't identify?
Well, we did walk away. I would say we noticed around 67, 69 that I had a perfectly round mark on my right arm, and about a little bit bigger than a pencil eraser that was perfectly circular that wouldn't tan for a very long time. Now, whether I can say that was contributed to that, I can't say for sure, but everyone else seems to have an opinion on that, and I guess the scoop mark is considered to be pretty, a pretty regular thing, I guess.
Well, when I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but when Bud Hopkins and I met in '03 at a conference we were both speaking at, we compared notes and photographs, and many of the photos he had of abductees with physical marks on their arms or legs, whatever, matched exactly some of the things I've seen in poltergeist cases.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, which seemed really interesting. So in any case, be that as it may, so let's go back to 69, and you moved to a neighboring town. Did all this seem to follow you from your farm in Sheffield?
No, it didn't.
Okay.
We were pretty, everything was pretty quiet. It was, 69 was definitely the most horrific experience that we had, but after that, it seemed to just, our lives just went on, and we pretty much just kind of left.
Okay.
Talked about it amongst ourselves, and just kind of
let. 69 being the sighting you were describing.
Well, it was more of a sighting. The four of us were on.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us more about what happened?
Well,
actually, we're going to take a commercial break, and then we'll be right back to give you a chance to collect your thoughts. Okay.
You got it.
All right, everyone, you were listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, ONWorldwide.com in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. And we're talking with Thom Reed of the Reed family abduction case. Very, very interesting stuff going on. And very, somehow kind of different, as we said last night. Anyway, we'll be right back with our guest. Wanted to tell you about Amazon Kindle Fire. Of course, it is the newest version of the Kindle e-reader device on which you can get all kinds of books, newspapers, and magazines, up to 900,000. But here we go a step farther. Released in November and ready for holiday gift giving is the Kindle Fire. $199. You can get movies, all sorts of information, downloads, websites. You can surf the web. You can do all sorts of things. And plus, still get those 900,000 books, newspapers, and magazines, including 4 of my books. And I'm sure that just about all the guests we have on the show, too, are authors, and they have books as well that are available on Amazon Kindle. So, again, check it out, AmazonKindle.com or Staples. Staples has these marvelous devices as well. So check it out, Amazon Kindle Fire. So I was going to ask you, too, if you could describe what actually happened in '69 that was, as you described, horrific.
Yeah, this is where everything kind of took a 180. Until that point, we hadn't really had anything to really look back on, and whether or not we remember it or not, I don't know, but as far as if something did happen, we don't remember anything horrific happening until this night. And I was actually in a horse show. I believe it was Butternut Basin Ski Resort, which actually was having a horse show that fall. And my saddle had come loose, and my mother was going to take me out for an ice cream. I'd gotten a brown ribbon, and I was upset. And so she had someone else take the horses back, and we were heading back to Sheffield. And it wasn't that late, maybe 9 o'clock or so, 10 o'clock, but it started getting dark. And after we had stopped, we had gone by a little store there, and I had picked up some fireballs, those little red fireballs, and I was giving one to my brother, who was in the back seat, behind a passenger seat. My mother was driving, my grandmother was in the passenger seat in front. And she had turned around because she thought he was too young for it, that he could choke. And so when she turned around, she had seen these lights out through the back of her Bel Air station wagon, and we all turned around at that point and started to look at what she was looking at, and you could see these just lights behind this line of trees. Now, the road to the left of us was higher up. It was like a little bit of a hill, and the trees sat up on this hill, and off to the right was pretty much open, and we were driving kind of along this side of this, I say mountain, but sure enough, she referred to it as later on in life as looking like a street mall. It was huge, and it looked like it was pacing us a little bit, but it was probably so big, and we saw these lights flashing, which was probably us, driving through these trees that made the lights look that way. But sure enough, like you hear about, we had been watching this for a few minutes, and the next thing you know, the car came to a stall, and it had gone off to the right of the road, and rocks were being picked up by the tires and hitting the bottom of the car. It was kind of one of those silent type things when you hear the stones, and the car stopped, and shortly after was that eruption of crickets that I've mentioned before that we heard. And it was just everywhere. I mean, even for years after that, when I heard crickets, my hairs would stand up.
It's very Lovecraftian in a way.
Something was creating this, and this is the part we don't really remember exactly what happened to this farm. We were all separated. The next thing I remember, I was in this huge hangar area, and Travis Walton and I talked about this a lot because there were a lot of similarities with his case here and what happened.
Yeah, Travis Walton, the famous case was at Arizona, where he was abducted, and a movie was made out of it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I just wanted in case
people hadn't heard part of it actually mirrors a lot of things that happened with him. Oddly, we actually have an article coming out together on it. But what happened here was I was in a room that was probably, I'm smaller, so everything seemed bigger to me back then. But I would say these ceilings had to be at least 20-something feet high, 25 feet high. It was huge. It was like being inside a room that was about the size of 4 football fields. And I was, maybe when I came into this area that was empty, there was nothing in there but a couple carts or whatever it was next to me on my right-hand side. I couldn't have been more than maybe 10 feet from a wall to my right, and there was a wall behind me that was almost leaned against it, which is where I believe I came in. And if this was hypothetically a football field, I would have been at like the 5-yard line on the far right side, and everything to my left was just open. And I was waiting there, and it wasn't that much longer that I saw a figure come in directly in front of me. It came in maybe 15 feet or so, very similar to what we saw earlier, but without that, nothing lit from it at all. Very much, similar to what people would reference today as like a half-humanoid type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it stopped. It didn't. And normally there would be a calm or something that would come over me, and I would feel more, easy about it. But it wasn't. It wasn't like that at all. And I had walked up to this figure, and I was taken by my left arm, and I was taken out this area that I was in. I went to the right outside this hallway. I was taken down a hallway, very similar, kind of a lit-up type of thing. I don't know where the light was generated from, but it was bright, quiet, and it came to like an intersection. I could have gone right, which these hallways are very narrow in comparison to what I saw later. And then I was taken to the left and then right into this room. When I came into the room, there was a table to my right that was pretty much butted up against the wall right as I came in. And the room was pretty squared off. In front of me was a flat wall. To my right was flat under the side of this table. And then where I came in was flat. But the wall to my left kind of came inward like a cylinder. And in the cylinder there were 2 pockets. On the far side was another exit. And on the inner pocket was where these 2 that I referenced that I've never seen before. This kind of egg-shaped head type of thing with this weird body and legs. There were 2 of them facing the wall, almost, I'd say not even 6 inches, a foot away from the wall. They were very close to this wall. And so I came in between them and this table. When I came in, I was to sit on this thing, which was actually very, very low. Everything was pretty low. I didn't have to jump up on the thing. I kind of faced this cylinder-looking wall, which was contoured inward. And I backed up to the table, and I sat on it, and I had my eyes on these guys, these 2 on the left. And there were 2 more humanoid looking ones. When I say that, I mean they're not looking like us, but similar.
Yeah. Were your family anywhere near here?
No, I heard them later.
You heard them later, okay.
But so I sat there, and I was very uncomfortable, and it was.
Well, what did they do to you?
The first time, there was actually one to my right too, and that was usually they're always to my left, but there was one to my right. And I don't know if I was going to lay down or whatever, but I jumped off the table, and I had gone past these 2 on the left. They had turned for a moment, and the only time I really saw what they looked like, ran out the side of this right side of the room, and I had come between the cylinder and the wall, and I came out into this intersection of hallway that was larger than, say, a basketball court. This intersection was the walkway itself, or the hallway itself, had to be more than 20 or 30 feet wide. And there were 3 hallways that joined it. I came off in it, and to the left of it, there was a hallway to the right that was almost like a Y, and I came right out pretty much in the center of this Y. Basically straight ahead, was off to my right, but again, I came off to the left of this Y. I could hear voices, and I'm pretty sure I was listening to see if it was my mother or whatever, or a family member or whatever, but I did hear voices. I stopped, and what I do remember about this is there were actually some type of grayish, blackish markings on the floor where these hallways turned, and more or less like a crescent moon shape. And then I was taken back into this room, which I really thought at this point, if I was going to be reprimanded, this would have been what would have happened.
So you were frightened?
Oh, yeah, this was nothing like before. This
Yeah.
was not an indoctrination. This was totally different. This was cold. This was regimented. This was fast-paced. There was no, are you okay? No.
Yeah.
The way it felt before, not that that's, but that's what I took from the earlier years. It doesn't mean that, that's just the way it felt about
Yeah.
it.
So I'm not trying to rush you here, but we only have so much time. But what did they do to you?
Well, at that point, I was put back on the table, and there was a what looked like the top of a tanning bed or an MRI machine that lowered from the ceiling. It had holes in the side of it, and then when it came over me, there was a way for them to reach underneath it. There were three what looked like rocks. I referred to them as stones when I was young because I don't remember them being perfectly round, and they were on some type of a pad. The one was put on my leg through the left side. Actually, the only one I remember is on the left. The left side of the hole towards my leg, and there was one towards my side. There was one up on my face. And at that point, that's when last thing I really remember. What's interesting about that is Travis actually had a situation like that. Well, if we have more time, we'll talk about that later. But we were, at that point, all returned to the car.
Okay.
When we got back to the car, I was behind the driver's seat. My mother was actually in the passenger seat when she had driven. My brother was curled up in the back.
They put you back in the wrong place.
My mother was, yeah.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was in the middle of the road.
In the middle of the road?
She was about 15 or 20 feet up, and she was walking kind of, like aimlessly, did not any direction. And there was a store that was about just up ahead from her on the left-hand side. It was like a hardware store of some kind. And she was walking in that direction, and I had, I guess I was the second one to come out of it. Got out of the car, and I was walking up to her, and she just kept kind of walking towards this store. It was like lit up with yellow lights. It was probably about 10 o'clock or so, getting ready to close. And she had walked in the front. It had like a bay window on the left, one on the right, a door in the middle, and like cement steps. It was a real old beat-up store. And she walked into it, and I followed her in, actually, and not too far behind her. And she walked straight to the back of it. There were bicycles and carriages and strollers. And she had gone into the back wall and kind of circled around and got behind these bikes. And I was standing on the opposite side towards the front of these bikes and strollers. And I had, let's go, Nana, we've got to go.
So she didn't seem to be herself.
No, she was definitely not herself. And she was pretty placid but moving on her own as if she was just totally out of it. And so I grabbed her hand and started to try to pull her, but obviously I was on one side of the bike, she was on the other, but, I was a little shook up too. And so what she did is she ended up pulling her hand back and putting her hands on a stroller, one of those big ones with springs on it and whatever, and started to roll it back and forth as if there was an infant in it, like she was trying to get it to go to sleep or something, and very creepy. And she pushed it forward, pulled it back, pushed it forward. It just was not.
So how'd you get her back into the car?
Well, I finally just, after a while, I said, Nana, I yelled Nana, and finally got her out of there, and she was walking by the clerk again on the way out, and she wanted to stop and say something to him, and I told her, but she never said anything to him that I remember, and I just kept kind of tugging at her, and when she got outside the store, she just teared up and broke out into tears, and my mother was up at that point, and
how long did it take her to get back to normal?
Well, we got home, and my mom put the house up for sale probably within, I don't know, I remember she sold the horses right away, and then she sold the property. We had on one side of the street we had 45 acres, on the other side we had 35. She sold 35 to her boss right off the bat. Got rid of the horses, and I'd say we were probably out of there within 3 months, 2 months, and moved immediately.
All right. Now let's take it. We're just going to have to move on here because we haven't got much time. Let's move on to your son, and as much as you feel comfortable talking about, we can talk about. So, tell us about what. So you grew up and married, and your son manifested some interesting abilities.
Well, it's something that seems to have followed our three children, including when I say that I mean my brother's two children as well. My son probably has had more experiments done or tests done or exams, if you will. Yet it is kind of unique, and we weren't looking for anything. It was just something that we noticed, and the teachers noticed. I mean, by the time my son was in first grade, he was moved into a gifted program, and by third or fourth grade had beaten an unbeaten chess pro in Florida, where he went to school and was a member of People to People, and he was testing for like 140 IQ, and he was blowing out numbers for the superior class by fourth and fifth grade. I mean, it was crazy, and he was just doing things in numbers and calculations that he shouldn't have been able to do. Now, whether we can attest to anything and say that came from anything outside normal development, I certainly can't attest to that, but I can certainly say that what he is able to do is very unique. And later on, he was tested by Michael Buckner, that was a PhD, and this was just a couple of years ago, and he went through several days. When I say days, I mean, 3 hours here, came back a couple hours on another day, but over a 3 or 4 day period, he tested with Zena cards and remote viewing and different types of, just tests in general for aptitude and IQ. It was everything. And Michael Buckner actually put in writing on September 15th of 2010 that my son did, in fact, show some signs of remote viewing, and that, he was certainly a remarkable young man in that respect.
Okay, and, but no one has found alien DNA in your son so far, at least.
Oh no.
Okay.
It's just that it seems like whatever happened with us, we think that it's possible. I'm going to say it's plausible that something was also maybe given back. My brother had punctured, wounds over his parts of his body where they looked like they extracted maybe some hormones of some sort. Which, you've got the information on that, and it's made us wonder. Was it a two?
Oh, of course. Tom, let me ask you this: have you at any point, or your family, had experiences with what are dramatically called the Men in Black? Any sort of agents, or I don't know, it all sounds melodramatic, but any sort of harassment, any sort of observation, surveillance. You mentioned last night that when you were on, we were on our show, we had some trouble connecting, and we, especially on the CBS version of the show, have a lot of experience with strange, unexplainable interference when we have guests who talk about subjects such as this. Have you had anything like that going on in your life all along?
Yeah, and normally I would say no, because I just think it sounds a little out there. But
yeah, it does.
With everything else, I mean, there were you probably saw this in the MUFON reports or the CMS or what in Star Team reports that we had an individual across the street from our house a few years ago, right around the time this Michael Buckner thing happened. Of course, he was killed 8 weeks after that report came out. We had a cameraman across the street with one of those long white Canon lenses taking out photos of us. We have a quad. My son jumped on a quad, chased him down the street. He jumped in a burgundy SUV. We've had situations like that. But then again, we also live near a nuclear power plant, so there's a lot of government cars around here anyway. But that's the first time we've had someone taking pictures of us. I can also say that we have had an FBI agent in our house. We have someone who has investigated our case, who you've got paperwork on actually. He's been followed when he was after or around the time he was investigating our case, but that's something he would probably need to tell you. But so it has happened. Now and it's not something that can be explained by anything else. I mean, first of all, I'm not that important that I need somebody with a telephoto lens taking shots of me from behind a bush. So it's why, I don't know.
Okay.
We have no idea. It was kind of something that happened a lot for a very short amount of time, and then nothing. As far as being harassed, I guess, or followed.
Okay. So I want to go back to your son for a second. Has his artistic ability excelled at all?
It's about the same.
Well, the reason I ask is there was a guest we had on the show not too long ago, or maybe I confused dates because all the shows run together. He was a seemingly average kid, and him and a bunch of his friends actually had a Mothman encounter. And then after that, his artistic abilities like skyrocketed. So did his math skills and all that stuff. So like some stuff that kids couldn't do. In this day, he's still he's ridiculously smart. He's an architect. He's an architect, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So I was just I was equating that with how your son is ridiculously good at math.
Yeah, we try to find commonalities in these cases because so many of them are so ultra personal. When you find a commonality, it often can be educational. So I'm sorry, so is that the case, as Ben asked?
Well, he actually, to be quite honest with you, he was having more fun with it a few years ago, but now that he's a senior and so on, he doesn't, really have as much fun with it, I think. But when I say that, I mean that you could take, and this is witnessed by several people that investigated our case, you can take a series of numbers and come up with a calculation and remove some numbers and an answer and so on, and not give him the number you started with, and just give him the 5 numbers in the answer, and 8 out of 10 times he'll tell you what number you took out of the answer without ever knowing what calculation you started with. And he can do that with you over the phone. I mean, if you want to call sometime and do it with him, he'll do it with you. I mean, he can do that. How can he do that? I have no idea.
How old is
Nobody
he?
can explain it.
How old is he now?
He's 17.
17. Okay. Hey, not that much younger than you've been.
I know.
No?
Oh, what a small world.
Yes.
All right, so after all this stuff has happened to you, and we stretched this over 2 shows, what do you think this has been all about? What's your opinion on this whole situation?
Well, obviously we haven't talked about 2009 a whole lot as far as, what took place there, but it would seem to me that whatever took place with my mother in Maine, whatever it was, there were 2 girls. My mother was 15 and her friend was 15. And they had the same experience on the same night. Very similar experience. And they both had children. And for whatever reason, I think that, let's hypothetically say the RH negative factor plays a part, or something biological played a part. Then it would make sense that whatever it was that my mother had in her, they were looking for in us. And with that said, maybe this indoctrination, as I worded it, is what we believe probably was the first time that they were checking to see if this was something that they were going to follow through with. And then, of course, 67, maybe that was their first attempt to do whatever. And 69, obviously, was, all of us at once. And then again, nothing really happened except for our children to have some form of abilities that we don't have. So the parents don't have it, but they do. And so you have to ask yourself, well, was this something mutual? Like I mentioned earlier. Then, of course, in 2009, my brother's son, Wyatt, who was 6 years old, going into 1st grade again, around the same time frame that these things tend to manifest themselves, or you notice things, was the one we had the biggest case of all. And, of course, there were magnetic fields around there, which we think is what causes us to feel a certain way and kind of gets you in that like a manipulated or influenced state where you're controllable. Mm-hmm. And the radiation, I think, speaks for itself. But that again was the youngest child turning 6, and every time one of our children seemed to go into school for 2nd grade was when things, tend to happen. Now, whether that's just a coincidence, I don't know. But we have 3 children, and it does seem to be a pattern there.
Yeah.
So others have said, sure, it looks generational because of that. Mm-hmm. There's definitely something going on, and we're still looking into it. But it does seem to be biological.
Yeah. Well, a lot has been said about genetic experiments being carried on by whoever this is. Obviously, as you know, there are many possibilities aside from aliens from other planets. I mean, that's entirely possible, I suppose. But we tend to, at least in our experience, lean on sort of the multiversal explanation of using parallel worlds and the sometimes very easily traversable boundaries between them. And of course, that doesn't mean people aren't from other planets, but whoever they are, there seems to be one commonality seems to be the notion that there is some DNA repair going on. The opinions that we've had, especially from the fellows involved in the Rendlesham NATO base intrusions in 1980 by these craft, were that maybe there are some people from our remote future who are not aliens, but actually us or our descendants, who are attempting to repair their DNA by taking ours. There is some evidence for that. But again, we get to it, and as we always say on the show, Tom, we really just don't know. So we want to thank you for being with us over the last 2 shows. We're going to do this again, and we have a lot to talk about off the air. And thank you again for the material you sent today. We'll be reviewing that. So we'll be talking to you soon, and thank you again, and very Merry Christmas to your family.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, guys.
Very good.
You're welcome.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, so that about wraps it up for the year here.
Yes.
And so we just wanted to remind you that you can check out all our podcasts, over 300 now, at BehindTheParanormal.com. You can buy my books on that site. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which is still in suspension because we haven't had a chance to get to know the new software yet. You can also become a site reporter for the show as well. We always have a need for good people to do that. And certainly many thanks to our producer, Steve Bianchi. And we will not see you live again until January 2nd. This next week's show, the day after Christmas, will be a rebroadcast here on 12:40 a.m.
And on our regular CBS edition, it is actually on Christmas, and then there's New Year's. So there will also be a rebroadcast. But we'll be back live on January 8th.
Okay. And we'll leave you this evening with a thought from a 19th century English cleric named Sidney Smith, who was considered the funniest man of his time.
Wait,
I don't know
why?
how funny they got between 1771. He was a witty guy.
Well, okay.
Well, 1771 to 1845. Try to make at least one person happy every day, and then in 10 years you will have made 3,650 people happy. So, hey,
what?
That's what he said.
In 10 years?
Yeah. Well, are we going to recheck his math?
Then that doesn't. Then wouldn't it be like 10,000 people? I mean.
Well, I don't. That's what the man said. Maybe he was a very funny guy, but he was a lousy mathematician. I don't know.
Actually, no. I think he's right. Never mind.
All right. Okay.
Well,
Sorry.
whatever. Continue.
Well, we'll ask.
You didn't finish the quote.
Well, I ran out of it. No, that's enough. If you got a question, I can imagine what you'd say to the rest of the quote. Anyway, the thing is, make people happy every day. Make people smile at least once a day, and you're doing a great thing. So,
thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. We'll see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.